Okay, welcome to Rock Docs, a podcast about movies about music, which I forgot to say last episode. You may have noticed. For those of you who noticed, extra credit.
Yeah.
I'm David Lizerbram.
I'm Andy Keatts.
And today we're going to talk about Zappa, which is a documentary about, you guessed it, Frank Zappa.
Yeah. Directed by Alex Winter.
2020. Available on Hulu.
Yes.
As we speak. But before we get to that, question for you, Andy. No wrong answers. Okay. First thing that pops into your head.
Yeah.
A favorite music book, rock book.
Our Band Could Be Your Life.
Okay. What is Our Band Could Be Your Life?
It's a series of essays, basically, or articles on
Michael Azerrad, written by Michael Azerrad,
but 15 bands or so from the indie underground starting in the 80s, basically.
Yeah. Black Flag, Sonic Youth, Minutemen. Replacements.
Yeah.
Great book. I've read it multiple times.
Yeah, it's great.
Canonical.
It's also, you could, in terms of things you can just like pick up and read, you like you could hop to, you're going to go to the beach for an afternoon, and you're not already in the middle of something. Yeah. Just grab that, knock out one of the chapters.
I'm at the beach. I want to read about Mission of Burma.
Yeah, exactly. The Mission of Burma chapter is pretty awesome, actually.
It's great. Yeah. You got Husker Du. Yeah. I mean, pretty much every band in that book is awesome.
Yes.
Minor Threat.
Yeah.
Just a great book.
Yeah.
Good answer, Andy.
Okay.
Well done.
All right, great. What do you have one?
Well, I mean,
You asked the question, but I mean, why does anyone ask a question? To get their chance to share their answer. Go for it.
Sure. A rock doc book. You mentioned that as we record this, this weekend, you are going to see the band Sleater-Kinney.
Yes.
Who I believe you've never seen before.
I've never seen before.
I've seen Sleater-Kinney many times.
Okay.
Big Sleater-Kinney fan.
Great.
You're going to enjoy yourself. They're great. Carrie Brownstein, the co-lead singer, co-lead guitar player, wrote a really great book. Called Hunger Makes Me a Modern Girl, about her time in Sleater-Kinney and actually why the band eventually kind of broke up for a while.
Yeah.
Because like being on tour in a semi-successful punk rock band for years and years and years, like destroyed her health and tore her to shreds. There's a lot about the like 90s riot girl scene, punk rock, feminism, and just, being on like nuts and bolts stuff about being on the road as a, kind of reasonably successful rock band, encounters with other musicians. It's just, she's a real good writer. She's obviously a very successful actress and comedian and writer and other, all these other things. Personality. But yeah, off the top of my head.
Okay.
I don't know why I thought of this thing that I was going to ask you this question off the top of your head that you had, and I did not think that you would turn it around.
Well, good. It worked out well because then we got your unadulterated thoughts.
There you go.
Yeah.
Okay. That concludes Rock Docs Book Club, and you can find us on Twitter at Rock Docs Pod, and also on Instagram, conveniently also at Rock Docs Pod. And let's roll into Zappa. This is tell us what this movie's about.
This movie, more than many others, is basically about the life of one person.
Birth to death.
Frank Zappa. If you don't know much about Frank Zappa, music, life, anything else,
why would anybody care about him?
You're going to get it all here.
Okay.
Yeah. And I mean that as a compliment, because I think it's possible to do that in like a paint by numbers way. And I don't think this movie does it in a paint-by-numbers way. I think it's clear that Alex Winter has deep reverence for the subject.
Yes.
And makes the movie that a Zappa diehard would want to see.
Yes. But also one that I think would be interesting or compelling to somebody who does not necessarily know or care much about Frank Zappa.
Definitely. Or even upon starting it was uninterested in the music.
Right.
I don't think that would be a problem.
No.
You'd still be, I would gather, you'd still be compelled enough by what a peculiar guy he is.
Yes.
That you would want to see what this man had continued to do with his life.
Yeah. This is a uniquely interesting very eccentric American character.
Yes.
That was just a documentary needed to be made about this person, and they made it.
Right.
If nothing else, it was made.
So before we get into the movie, the backstory on how this movie was made,
Yes,
is pretty interesting. I listened to an interview with Alex Winter about it, and I think if I had been following the press rollout of this movie when it happened, maybe this would have been told multiple times. I heard it on the Zappa Cast, official podcast.
Okay.
Created by the Zappa estate.
I have, in fact, been known to listen to the Zappa cast because I am a Zappa head.
Yes.
As we will get into in this podcast. This is really the first episode where one of us is really a hardcore fan of the artist or whatever, and the other one, not that you hate Frank Zappa, it's just he's not one of your guys.
Not one of my guys, no. Whereas there's, say, the Dylan or Tribe episodes
where we're both just fully bought in,
jumping through the microphone to talk about how much we like the music.
Yes. Okay.
So basically, Alex Winter, who is, you may know from Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, or
and who was the other guy in that? I don't remember.
It wasn't a guy; it was Lori Petty.
Yes, Lori Petty. Sure.
Yeah.
George Carlin is who I'm thinking of.
Right.
Okay. Yes, one of the two actors in Bill. If you know the name of the other actor,
the two equally
please write
famous
us
actors,
at Rock Dog Spot on Twitter.
Yeah, or he's also in Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey.
Oh yeah, okay.
And Bill and Ted's 3, he's in that also.
Yeah, he also created the show on MTV, The Idiot Box, which was unfortunately canceled. I think after like one season, but it was really good.
Okay,
back in the early '90s, go look that up. The Idiot Box, kids, it was good.
Okay, good. So he made a documentary about the Silk Road, the crypto-powered drug dealing dark web.
It's where I get all my black tar heroin.
Yeah, I mean it's the safest place to get it. Back when in 2014.
Yes. Till Alex Winter blew.
Yeah,
knocked us all out.
Yeah. So he makes that movie, and then he's got this production company. He's looking for his next project, and he meets up with one of Zappa's kids, who also has a production company, and pitches him on making the Zappa documentary.
Does he say who it is?
Oh yeah, he's a list. No, it's not Dweezil. He's a listed producer on this film.
So Amit.
Yeah, it's Amit Zappa. Yeah, so Amit Zappa is a listed producer on this film.
Okay.
Yeah. So he goes to Amit, and Amit's like, "Yeah, we're interested. You're not the first person who's asked, basically," and takes him to Gail Zappa. Mm-hmm. Gail is Zappa's white widow at this point, who is now deceased since the start of this project, and he pitches her, and she's intrigued but doesn't say yes. There's no financing for the film yet, and he makes like a teaser roll from footage that's just available on YouTube,
right? Just
to show her what his vision would be, and she's pretty into it. And so she takes him down into the vault, the
famous Zappa vault,
the same famous Zappa vault, the collected works of Zappa's life. And they're showing him, here's all the stuff we have, and he's blown away by it. But he's also like, it smells like vinegar down here. All of this film is dying. You need to preserve it, and the good news is it's possible to preserve a lot of this stuff. But the bad news is it's very expensive.
Right.
And so he spends basically a year putting together a Kickstarter just to preserve the Zappa vault.
Okay.
And it's like a side project of the film, which doesn't yet exist yet, hasn't been greenlit, doesn't have funding. And they raise $1 million from Zappa fans to preserve this vault, which they do.
Right.
And at that point, he comes up with enough funding to make the movie.
Right. Okay.
So that's how this movie came to be. Okay. That all started in like 2014.
Okay.
Gail dies in 2015. She gets, her interviews done early.
Right.
But she's like, she never gets to see this movie.
Right.
And so then Alex Winter goes to work for 5 years to make this movie, basically.
Right.
Now he's doing other things. He filmed Bill and Ted 3 during this time. But that's the backstory on this movie. And so it's sort of, I think, fair to call this like an important film in the preservation of Zappa's life. Like this, all of that vault now is protected, and it'll end up at a university or a museum.
Right.
Someone in Prague will build a Zappa museum. Something.
If
right?
so, I'm there.
Yeah.
Prague person.
Yeah.
Mr. or Mrs. Prague, invite me. I'll be there.
Yeah. So the you know and then it also this is the definitive film of about Frank Zappa's life.
Right.
So and Frank Zappa's a important character specifically to receive that treatment. He deserves that, both of those things.
Right. He's sort of a under-known, under-respected character who was very important in the entire history of rock from the mid-'60s, sort of before Sgt. Pepper's, like the really early 60s, like LA scene, through the 70s, 80s, and he died in 1993, unfortunately, of cancer. And he did a lot of groundbreaking work. I mean, just a kind of thumbnail sketch Frank Zappa for people who are not weirdos who are into Frank Zappa. So Frank Zappa is from an Italian family. He had basically no contact with music or interest in music until his teenage years, when he heard this is maybe the late 50s, when he heard kind of in his succession some very avant-garde, very weird experimental classical music, and then also like a little bit of black R&B and blues music that he was exposed to in the kind of the suburbs. And he was like...
Through Captain
Beefheart, his high school buddy, Don Van Vliet, who became, Captain Beefheart and his sometime collaborator, sometime antagonist, etc.
Yeah.
Zappa was a real autodidact. I mean, he did not go to school or had any kind of music lessons. He taught himself not only how to play guitar at an insanely good level, like
by going to the library.
By going to the library, he learned how to compose musical scores for some of the most complex and out there classical type music that has ever been written. Now, I'm sure there's like some hardcore classical heads out there who are fans of this podcast who are also listening, who are like, wait a minute, but so-and-so you never heard of is okay, fine. But broadly speaking, this is a person who had no education or training whatsoever and just said, there's books on music composition in the library. I'm going to go read them, learn every single thing about every single instrument, and how to make music that is nobody's ever even conceived of making before. Taught himself how to play guitar, drums, etc. Starts rock bands, kind of like when that was even a thing. He started rock bands, basically, he said, because he was composing music and he wanted to hear what it sounded like, and there was no other way to do it. So he started bands to do that. Sort of conned a producer, a record label, into signing them in the kind of freewheeling days of the mid-'60s when it was like, hey, who knows what these kids are into? Gets them to allow him to record crazy music that is like a combination of R&B and doo-wop and dirty jokes and also classical music that he'd composed and all kinds of crazy stuff, and just took it from there, became an entrepreneur. Just went out totally on his own when nobody else was doing this, formed his own record label, took control of his own music, got involved in a lot of lawsuits, very few of which are mentioned in this movie, but he spent a lot of time dealing with lawyers. Then he went on, after years and years of being a rock star and very weird character, to and a family man. He married Gail. He had 4 kids. By all accounts, was kind of a happy family man in his own weird way. Who just like he never, ever, ever, ever took any drugs and was very anti-drug in the 60s when he was the weirdest looking and acting and sounding person by far in that scene. He was stone cold sober.
Which is like a sort of forgotten in today. It's like a forgotten element of the counterculture was like that there were people who were like looked and acted as hippies that were not involved in drugs.
Yeah.
In fact, they were like Christians.
Yeah.
Like born again Christian.
Well, he wasn't a
hippieism.
Christian either.
No, by any means.
No.
But like the it was a broader movement than just like the Grateful Dead doing acid with Ken
exactly.
Kesey,
Yeah. So then just to kind of put a button on this, then as time goes on, he gets involved in politics. He considers running for president. He testifies in front of Congress against censorship. He gets very involved, as the film goes into, in the liberation of Czechoslovakia from communism. And he gets into like 1,000,001 crazy things before his unfortunate premature death, like I said, in 1993. And the movie, I'm just telling you all this, number one, because people might not know who this guy is or why anybody would care. And also, like, you know, what is this movie about?
Yes.
And the movie is about that guy.
It's about all.
Which is like, how did this guy, what is the deal with this guy?
Yeah. And now, I would say that the movie is very much about his music. It's very much about his relationship to music and his compulsion to actually hear the music that he heard in his head. He says it like 10 different ways at 10 different times in his life.
Right.
That all he does, everything he's doing, is driven by the simple desire to take the music that he is hearing in his head, to write it down on a paper, and then to get the band that is necessary to play that music, to play it.
Or orchestra or whatever.
Whatever collection of musicians is needed to play the thing that he just wrote, which was stuck in his head.
Yes.
So that he can hear it.
And record it.
And play it live.
Go home and listen to it.
And that's all. And that comes from 1965 when he founds the Mothers of Invention.
Right.
Through his death in 1990, you know, but he dies in 93 when he stops playing music in 1990, basically.
Right.
All the way through that.
Right.
It is clear that he is of singular focus to do that.
Right. Like he talked at one point, not in the movie, but he talks about like how basically his job is writing dots on paper.
Yeah.
Like he writes dots on paper, musical notation. Then he wants to somehow convince somebody to play that really well because this music is impossible to play by the most superhuman and insane of musicians. And then to be able to listen to it and be like, yeah, man, that's what it sounds like. Cool.
Right.
Like that's pretty much it.
And
he did a lot of it. A lot.
So, yeah, they say at the end that he released during his life 63 albums, and posthumously they've released another 50-something.
Easily.
Yeah. So, like, 100 albums in this man's life.
Sure.
He died prematurely.
Right. And this isn't like 100 albums of him, like, doing a vampy, you know, doing another blues tune.
Yeah.
Like, this is, like, crazy music, much of which, like, is, like, just dense and bizarre, and often scatological, and political commentary, and
offensive sexually, often
offensive to every group. If you're looking to be offended, you can find it in his audio, either in terms of the audio or the written content.
Yeah,
in his music.
He tours in the '60s with Lenny Bruce.
Yeah, sure.
Right. He's a free speech activist from the beginning.
Yeah, and he is by all accounts, a very remote dude.
Yes.
Like, the people who played in his band talk about going on tour with him for years and years. And they're, like, giving up their lives to execute this man's vision. Because he is this is not like a, hey, man, why don't we do one of your songs kind of vibe. No. That's not what's happening.
No.
And, like, it's like, we played together for 5 years, and one time he said, yeah, it was pretty good.
Yeah.
Like, that would be like the highlight of somebody's life playing with him.
Yeah, I was going to say his singular focus on getting the music on his head out and to be played appropriately is to the exclusion of any sort of bond with these musicians. And yet, they all, to a man, clearly love him.
There is a lot of love.
Define their lives through what he seems to have meant to them. I mean, there's the one band member, Ruth, in this movie.
Right, Ruth Underwood, yeah.
Ruth Underwood, who has some fantastic footage of her as a young person playing music with a giant smile on her face. She's talking about this guy who seems to not care about anyone. Yeah. Like a son.
Yeah.
Or a father or a brother, right?
Yeah.
And there's 3 or 4 other musicians who all have the same relationship that, no, he never showed me any affection. No, I never expected it.
I never got a handshake.
Yeah.
But these people break down crying.
They break down crying just thinking
about their
him.
love of him.
Yeah.
And maybe they just didn't interview the people that hate him.
Yeah,
and played in the band for 6 months and were like, this is the worst boss I ever had in my life.
Fuck this guy, right?
Like, you could probably make another movie about the worst boss in the history of music who was just a complete tyrant.
So one of the things that Winter does that's interesting, and basically any live footage scene, he throws up the name of every musician.
Right.
And I think they're trying to show how many different people he played with.
A lot of people, yeah.
They were all interchangeable parts to Zappa.
Yeah.
Except for a brief run with the original Mothers of Invention.
Yeah.
That he actually kept together as a band.
Right.
And then after that, he broke them up.
And it was just Frank Zappa and whoever.
And whoever he needed to play the music that he had just written for that show or that tour. And yet, one name that never comes up on screen unless I missed it is Lowell George.
Yeah.
An immensely famous musician who was in Mothers of Invention briefly.
Yeah. Doesn't show up.
Doesn't even and like you go see a Lowell George documentary, which there is one.
Yeah.
Not good.
Well, maybe a future episode of Rock Docs.
Future episode.
So save your review for that.
And he's like a borderline Rock and Roll Hall of Fame member,
Right.
Lowell George,
Yeah,
right?
Sure.
He's the lead singer, frontman, creative impulse behind Little Feat.
Right. Yeah. A big band.
A big band. A producer of Shakedown Street by the Grateful Dead.
Sure.
Right?
Right.
A major musician. And his relationship with Zappa is a big part of his life.
Right.
The story of Lowell George includes very much that he crossed paths with Zappa.
Right. But he's like the 73rd most important musician in the history.
That doesn't matter.
He doesn't even make the cut of this documentary.
Yeah, it's crazy.
It's, I would say, if I'm going to, the thing about this documentary that kind of, the first time I saw it as a Zappa fan, I don't know. I thought I just kind of was taken aback was the fact that, like, there's a lot of his music, but there's very little, like, it's all kind of layered together.
I completely agree.
The whole documentary is composed and cut together in the total, like, super choppy MTV fashion. Like, it is like bam, 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 which kind of accords with Zappa's music because it's very rhythmic in a very odd meter. Like, he rarely did songs in a very standard 4/4 like every other song on the radio. Boom, 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 boom.
Yeah.
That was not the way that his, like, metabolism worked.
Yeah.
Like, everything is in a weird time signature and stopping and starting and herky jerky. The movie is composed to kind of fit that vibe, I would say. But, like, so there's just constantly things flashing on the screen and things happening and cutting back and forth. But as a result, you don't ever like relax into a performance. Like, there's not like 3 minutes straight of Zappa and his band playing Penguin in Bondage or something, and you're just hanging out, like which I think is, I don't know. Like, I kind of felt like maybe
it's my biggest criticism of the movie.
Well, here's the knock on Frank Zappa is that for all the things we've said, a lot of people feel like his music is unlistenable. If I'm being honest.
Well,
I'm not one of those people.
Well, so, yeah, okay.
Perhaps
so
there's something wrong in my head that I can enjoy this music.
Well, no. So, all right. Let me take a step back. So, I'm interested to hear that you say all of that because I was going to ask you if you thought that this was essentially in the MTV style, which is a term you've used on Dig.
Sure. Yes.
And I found myself thinking the same time, like, oh, this is exactly what Dave was saying.
This is the MTV style. Yes. What by which we mean the 80s choppy, fast-cutting MTV style. Pioneered by the directors in the early days of MTV who were coming out of commercials and who were, like, just, experimenting with new techniques of montage, of combining discordant visual images very quickly, trusting that your brain and your eyes would be able to process this imagery combined with this music and to have an experience around it, even though, like, the images didn't necessarily always narratively tie together one to the next.
Yeah. And so while I say that this movie is, like, about his music intensely, about his singular focus on his music, you don't actually hear much of his music.
Right.
You don't get to sit and watch a 4.5 minute performance, which is a common thing to see in rock docs.
Right. Like, okay, now's the part where we settle in and they're going to do their greatest hit. And, like, all right, maybe you get the main verse and then a chorus and then maybe a little guitar solo. You're not going to see the whole song. Yeah. But you get a good chunk of music.
And look, he's got, 60 albums he produced in his life.
Right.
So there's a lot of Zappa music.
Yes.
The amount of Zappa music I have personally heard is a teeny window in that 60 albums.
Yes.
Right? Now, you may have you heard every Zappa album? Do you think?
Well, earlier this year, I went and I listened to, in order, all of his studio albums.
Wow. Okay.
And
You
then
are
my
a
brain
sicko.
broke
You are
and ran out of my brain, out
you
of my
are
ears.
A sick man.
But that
and
doesn't even include all the live albums and the different
Sure.
mixes and things. But I've listened to quite a lot of the Zappa ouvre.
All right, you are a sicko.
And then I went into YouTube and found some other stuff, and there's bootlegs.
Okay, good. Well,
yes.
I have some listening habits around Fish and Grateful Dead that are I'm not especially proud
equally
of.
abhorrent.
But that is something. So anyway, I have heard a relatively small selection of the Zappa catalog.
You may want to check out the you may want to check out the playlist that accompanies this podcast episode on Spotify.
I intend to. But I have one of my Zappa takes is that he has unfairly been called inaccessible. And now that's something that people say about Fish too.
Sure.
And I disagree with that as well. So again, this might be that my brain is broken or my ears don't work or I'm a very stupid man. But
all these things could be true.
But I think that Zappa, I think people have been done a disservice by being told this is hard to listen to. You're not going to like it right away. Keep listening.
You won't get it.
You won't get it. Or it's really interesting if you keep listening. All of these things that people say about like, you know, quote unquote sophisticated music or avant-garde music that like, or authors, there's like authors that people recommend with this qualification that like you'll
like Thomas Pynchon.
You're gonna need
like Frank
Thomas
Zappa.
Pynchon, but you like need the Gravity's Rainbow reader alongside you, whatever. And like I just don't think that's true about Frank Zappa. From the music I've listened to, Frank Zappa, I think it's pretty damn catchy.
Yeah,
I think it sounds awesome. I think it sounds like a guy who liked blues music, who had very interesting ideas about arrangements and time signatures that were certainly unusual.
Right.
Who could shred on the guitar.
No doubt.
But like there's some stuff like I think you could put it on after you like hanging out with your friends, you like listen to a Warren Zevon record, you could and then throw on Zappa and it's certainly different.
Yeah.
But it would be no one would drop their drink and suggest that the party suddenly sucked, you know? And like, so I actually think it's a missed opportunity to introduce people to the fact that it's not homework,
right?
That listening to Frank Zappa is not homework. It's good. It's interesting, fun music that like you could listen to Joe's Garage at a party.
Yeah.
It's a very accessible album, frankly.
Yes, sure.
You know?
Now, yeah, and I mean, some of his music maybe fits that mold more than others.
Right.
But the interesting thing is that he says is like the first time he read about this composer, Edgar Varese, who was this avant-garde composer from Europe. And he read some story in like Reader's Digest or something in the 50s when he was a kid, like, this music is so horrible, nobody could ever possibly listen to it.
Yeah.
And he thought to himself, well, I got to get my hands on that. So he somehow found that record of this like really weird experimental music, and he put it on, and he like, you know, bought it, put it on, and he's just loved it right away. Yeah. And he basically spent the rest of his life doing that.
Yes.
He's like, I'm going to go to the library, learn how to compose music like this, and then do that until I drop dead, which is mission accomplished, dude.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I mean, it's kind of like what you're saying is like, and he says like, when he's interviewed, he's like, I just didn't understand why everybody didn't like this.
Yeah.
Like, it's not like he
was trying to challenge people. It was like trying to repel the audience.
Right, exactly. It's like people say like he could have written hit song, and he did have a few hit songs kind of accidentally, like Valley Girl, etc. But it's like people say like he could have written hit songs all day long if that's what he wanted to do, but it literally did not occur to him to do that. Like that, he was just on a mission of doing his thing. And so I think what you're saying about his music is kind of like what he was saying about the like weird composers he was into. Was like, I don't know why everybody didn't like this.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and so when the original Mothers form and they're playing in LA and they move to New York and they go on tour, like knowing what's in that vault, I want to luxuriate in those 5 years before he breaks up the band.
Yeah.
I feel cheated that I don't get Like, you're through that in like 15 minutes.
Right. Yeah.
Like, I'll be honest. I think Alex Winter is really interested in Zappa the guy, the full picture of him.
Yeah.
I would happily trade 30 more minutes of 65 to 75
Right.
for the entire censorship battle with Congress over the parental advisory lyrics and his trade missions to Prague. It's interesting that he did that, and I don't need to see as much of it as I saw compared to give me the footage that's been in this vault for 50 years that we've raised $1 million to preserve because it is something that the history of music needs for the next generation needs to find.
I hear,
and also let me find it now.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. Yeah. A lot of that has a lot of that stuff from that band is available in audio format. Like you can go on Spotify and find a lot of it now. Right. In terms of the video, I mean, the video of his performances, specifically in the 60s, is crazy.
Yes.
And it is not like he was a composer in a very broad sense. Like, he saw himself as an artist. Yeah. And what he was doing was not just, telling the guitar player to play an E flat. Yeah. Like, everything was part of what he was doing. The costumes are crazy. There are like the lighting and there's like these
theatrics.
There's crazy puppet shows and all kinds of disturbing imagery and weird stuff happening. And it's hardly even talked about. It's just kind of shown. I don't even know what people are thinking, because like you think of like the weirdest stuff happening in the 60s and it's like, Jerry Garcia tripping on acid and playing Dark Star. Yeah. That's weird.
Jim Morrison peed.
Right.
Yeah.
But that's like,
it's like it's mundane compared to what
that's like a Boy Scout picnic compared to what was happening at these Frank Zappa Mothers shows that like 30 people were at night after night. Nobody showed up, but there's tons of film of it, and it is crazy and insane. Like, I do want to see more, and I hope that they'll, somehow it'll show up on YouTube or somewhere,
and put that in context,
right?
Like, that.
Yeah, there's no discussion of like why he did the theatrics.
Yes.
There's a lot of discussion about the music and what he was doing in terms of the music, but there's no discussion of like, why did you have these crazy puppet shows? Why did you dress this way? Why did you have these people do these crazy stunts? Was it a way to draw the audience in so they would listen to the music?
Yeah.
Or was that also part of the point? It's just kind of like thrown out there as like visual insanity, and it's compelling.
Yeah.
But it is a teaser for that. It's a little bit of a tease.
Yeah, I mean, I always think I think rock docs are often a great way to get somebody into a band,
right?
Or to nurture somebody's developing interest in a band.
Yeah,
and like I'm kind of there for Zappa right now,
right?
Like I've listened to a handful of Zappa things in my life, and I've always kind of liked it, but not mostly listened to it,
right?
And a version of this movie that spends a lot of time showing me live concert footage might have sunk the hook.
But maybe like there needs to be a Mothers of Invention in the 60s documentary that is really just more about that aspect of his life.
Right.
Because he did do a lot of stuff.
Yes.
And to cram it all into 2 hours is quite a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot happens in this 2 hours of this guy's life.
Yeah, man, and how. He is a remarkable individual.
Yeah.
Also, boy, interesting ideas about what it means to be a loving husband.
Yes.
For instance, if you get the clap, it is not cool to just give that to your wife and keep it a secret.
No, not cool.
No, you need to tell her to get penicillin.
Right, yeah.
I mean, it's your wife.
Yeah, sure.
That's what he says after that. He goes, I mean, she's my wife.
Yeah.
Like, it's the least I can do.
Right, yeah. And yet he married this woman when they were both young.
Yeah.
And they stayed together apparently in a loving marriage.
Yeah.
Till he died.
Yeah, and so I have no grounds to argue with him.
She was the devoted keeper of the Zappa legend for years, decades after that.
And I have no grounds on which to argue, nor do I have any other information to bring to the table. But Alex Winter says that he thinks Gail may be the most important, if not one of the most important women in the history of the rock business.
Yes.
Because she was the one. I mean, it's Zappa Records, but it was her who was running the independent label. That was, again, is it the first independent label where there's some other? It was a very early independent label. Going alone was new at the time,
right?
And she ran it, not Frank.
Right.
Frank was being insane, writing 6 million songs an hour.
Right. While we're handing out homework assignments, somebody could make a documentary about Gail Zappa.
Yeah.
That would be interesting on its own.
Yeah.
Because it really does seem like this is the classic story of like the charismatic dude who's out there doing dude stuff and getting all the press and all the love while his wife is back home, not only taking care of their 4 kids, but also running the business and keeping things afloat and managing this crazy person's life. And not getting any of the love in the press, and doing, by all means, a heck of a job of all those things.
Yeah. In the early 90s, were Moon and Dweezil like pseudo-celebrities? I mean, I know Moon Zappa was basically she was a co-billed act on Valley Girl.
Right.
So she sang it. But like, were they like River Phoenix? Were they like young LA kids who were out?
Yeah. They were celebrities.
Yeah.
Dweezil's had different TV shows and things. Yeah. Moon was an MTV VJ for a while.
Oh, was she?
Which was a big deal in those days.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Like nobody
yeah.
could tell you who an MTV VJ is, if that still is a job that exists.
I don't even know if that's a job that exists.
If so, nobody could tell you who is that person.
When I was in like elementary school, I had opinions on every MTV VJ.
I could not. For the first 10 years of MTV, I could name you every VJ who ever existed.
So Moon was an MTV VJ.
She was one of
them. Interesting.
Diva and Ahmet came a little later, so they weren't necessarily in that celebrity scene. This is now an opportunity for me to tell my story.
Okay.
I don't know that this is good content or of interest to anybody, but it is related.
All right.
So when I was a kid, my parents were involved in Democratic politics in California. And they would go to fundraisers, and I would sometimes be dragged along because I was a kid. So I remember one time I was maybe 7, 8. This is 83, 84, I'm thinking, in terms of the political season.
Mm-hmm.
And I was stuffed into a blazer and slacks and probably uncomfortable shoes.
Yanking at the sleeves.
Yeah. And just was taken to somebody's house for a fundraiser. And I remember people saying, oh, yeah, there's going to be celebrities there. It's going to be great. I don't think I knew who any of these people were. Like, they weren't on Sesame Street and they weren't Luke Skywalker, so I didn't care about them, whatever. But there were people there. There's a lot happening. Now, I was kind of an awkward kid and not super athletic. But at some point, a softball game broke out. And one way or the other, I found myself in left field. And I was terrified because the people who were playing were adults. I mean, they were probably 17,
right.
But to me, they seemed like grown-ups.
Yeah.
I was a little kid and wearing a little blazer, like a tiny version of the guy from Rushmore, except much less self-assured.
Yeah, yeah.
And I was like, if somebody pulls a ball towards me, it's not going to be good.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm not going to be able to make the cutoff throw.
Just desperately want that not to happen.
I'm terrified. So I look over, and there's this dude standing right by me. I don't know if it was just a bunch of people, whatever. There's this dude standing right by me, and he gets the vibe that I'm throwing off.
Yeah.
And he looks over and he goes, "Don't worry, man, I got you covered." He totally caught it. He goes, "It's all good. If a ball comes, I'm happy to cover you. My name's Dweezil." And that was Dweezil Zappa.
Awesome.
And I was like, this is the coolest person that ever exists. Not only is he
this
saving
guy
my ass,
is literally Benny the Jet Rodriguez,
celebrity rock and jock softball
Sandlot.
game that I somehow found myself in. But his name is Dweezil.
Yeah,
and he's like a cool dude with cool hair and sideburns. Yeah. I mean, what else could? I mean, I didn't even know he was friends with Steve Vai, nor did I know who Steve Vai was. But that would have even taken it to another level. But anyway, so I don't know what that has to do with anything other than to say, shout out to Dweezil Zappa. I ride for Dweezil Zappa to this day. If you're listening to this, Dweezil, thank you. You helped a brother out, and
I'm here to say that's a stone cold chiller move by Dweezil Zappa.
So I can't say much about Frank or Gail. I may have met them. I don't recall, but I will tell you that they raised a good kid.
Okay,
because that Dweezil's a chill dude. But yes, they were kind of celebrities at the time. I don't know what you'd call them. I bet they knew Nick Cage. You know what I mean? And maybe Sofia Coppola in those days.
Right.
You know, it was kind of like that world.
The 90s
They were
kids.
adjacent to the Rat Pack.
Seth Green.
Yeah, maybe. Okay. Yeah, I'm thinking more like Rat Pack, Robert Downey Jr., Demi Moore.
Yeah, I think
Emilio Estevez.
Oh, those were like all over.
I feel like that was kind of that era.
Yeah.
I mean, Valley Girl ended up being a movie with Nicolas Cage, so yeah, I feel like they were adjacent to that, and maybe they had tried to do acting careers, but never really got to that level or didn't want to or whatever. Dweezil is a successful musician, and guitar player who often goes out and plays Frank Zappa music,
right?
And with some of the members of the Zappa band, he's great. I've only good things to say about Dweezil, but I've ran out of Dweezil stories.
Yeah.
So if you're looking for more of that,
He's friendly with fish.
Oh, tell me.
Yeah. Well, there was before Frank Zappa died, Dweezil told his dad, I think you'd like these guys, played them some songs, and Frank did like 2 different songs.
Really?
Yeah, and told Dweezil that, and Dweezil told the guys. Trey mentioned that on a podcast recently.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
It all ties together.
It does.
You always got to drag me into fish.
It's gonna, when we get to like episode 50, it's gonna all pay off. that I've somehow managed to sprinkle this maligned band into all 50 installments of the Rock Doc canon.
Let's talk a little bit about the later era, because really what the movie does is basically skips over the 70s.
Yeah, which totally skips over the 70s.
I mean, you've got the classic Mothers from the 60s, Mother's Invention, and then the 70s, many Zappa heads think is his best era in terms of music.
Right.
Tons of great albums, Joe's Garage, Zoodalores. I personally like Weasels Rip My Flesh. Check that one out. That's a good one. Tons of good stuff, but the movie covers the 70s.
Late 60s?
What's that?
What was Hot Rats?
69, 70?
69, 70, yeah.
But yeah, sure, in that era.
Yeah.
Dissolving the Mothers and into this solo era, the kind of like jazz fusion / shreddy guitar stuff. The movie dispenses with the 70s in about 5 minutes. And
they're just like, and then he kept making music on his own.
Yeah.
A lot of it.
Guy made music.
Yeah.
Takes a hard turn into the 80s. And then we get a lot of 80s.
A lot of 80s, yes.
I think I like that more than I'm getting a sense that you did.
No, look, it's not that it's not that I disliked any of the 80s content. I just really wanted I like 70s music.
You always want more.
Andy. I like 70s music very much.
Sure.
I felt cheated that I didn't get it.
Right.
And I am like, I'm especially fascinated by the like post Beatles 60s.
Yeah.
Or just the non Beatles 60s.
Yeah.
Like the early Dead career is like, they're like basically a garage band.
Right.
And I feel like I had a lot to learn and a lot to enjoy.
Right.
In watching some raw footage.
Right.
Of the original Mothers.
Right.
And I think so I just wanted more of that. But the 80s stuff is interesting, and he becomes such a character. He becomes such like a public version of himself, as opposed to this like experimental artist that's doing his thing on like the side of society to like a niche group of weirdos.
Right. It was like, maybe like, remember Frank Zappa, one of the people from the 60s? He's doing jazz fusion now.
Right.
Believe it or not, or whatever. Or
right.
Something pops up and like, Against All Odds becomes a top 10 album briefly. And then, people like that song, Don't Eat the Yellow Snow.
Okay. Yeah. So, but anyway, what did you love about the 80s stuff so much?
Well, I mean, there's basically
besides that it was talking about the Dweezil David Lizerbram era.
Yeah, somehow they didn't get into the softball game.
Yeah.
Well, they get into 2 major things basically that happened in the 80s. One of which I knew a lot about. Mm-hmm. One of which I knew much less about, and I actually found to be some of the most interesting stuff was, so first there's the whole censorship battle. So just kind of like to thumbnail this, for lack of a better term, the wives of a bunch of senators, including Al Gore's then wife, Tipper, and James Baker's wife, if I'm not mistaken.
Correct.
So, you know, both sides of the aisle here got together and got all worked up about being offended by different kinds of music. Prince's lyrics, heavy metal, Ozzy Osbourne, blah, blah, blah. There was a lot of stuff in those days about how like heavy metal and this new music called
satanic.
rap was satanic, and they was turning kids into, you know, into devil worshippers, and it was causing suicides and all this horrible stuff, and that there should be labeling and censorship of music. And so this rose to the level of like congressional hearings, and Zappa gets wind of this, puts on a suit, cuts his hair, shows up to Congress, and just, you know, I mean, this movie, you really only see very little of it, but there's footage you can find out there of him just like talking truth to power and just laying it out there for Congress about the problems of censorship very rationally. He's not angry. They don't care about his music because he wasn't popular. Right? They're not going after him.
Yeah.
He just showed up to the defense.
Although it was dirtier than most of the music he was defending. They didn't even know or care. No, yeah. Like, it probably didn't feel self-interested to anybody. Like,
and they expected this long-haired burnout idiot who like had taken too much acid, and instead they get this guy who had spent like his entire life reading books and like studying political theory and all this other stuff, and like even though some of his views were wacky, like was extraordinarily articulate and could just destroy anybody in an argument when he got, you know, into the right
you wouldn't
mode.
Want to find yourself on the other side of an argument with Frank Zappa. No,
he was not. Yeah. And so he comes out against censorship, and that was very influential for me. Yeah. Like reading years later when I was, you know, a teenager, his book, The Real Frank Zappa book, another classic rock book. You know, just, you know, reading a lot about this, you know, crusade against censorship was influential on me and affected like what I did, you know, later on in school and my career. And, so there was a lot of that. But then also they get into the whole Czechoslovakia thing. Yeah. Frank Zappa was a very, I mean, I guess you'd call him a libertarian of sorts.
Yeah, I have some thoughts about this.
And he's, you know, he was a capitalist in the traditional sense of like, he started his own record label. He wanted to make money. Like, he was not opposed to making money. Yeah. He would then turn around and spend that money getting the London Symphony Orchestra to, like, record his crazy music. But he was not a communist by all, you know, by any stretch of the imagination.
He says something very interesting about, they asked him, like, why he doesn't write hits. And he's like, well, that would be a business decision. I make artistic decisions.
Right.
Which is interesting because he's not saying, I never make business decisions.
Right.
He's saying, when I write music, I'm making artistic decisions. And then I am quite businesslike when I try to promote it.
Yeah.
You know, when what I do with it next, that's when the business comes in.
Right, exactly. You know? Like two sides of his brain.
Yeah, yeah.
So he gets involved in the I guess the Czechoslovakian freedom movement.
Yeah.
And somehow it turns out that, like, for whatever reason, in parts of the Soviet Union, under the Iron Curtain, like the name Frank Zappa was synonymous with like freedom and rock and roll. For whatever reason, that like was just a term that was used by like police would say, turn off that Frank Zappa music, you know, when they were trying to suppress these ideas. So he became seen as a hero to people, maybe who haven't heard his music, but just knew that he was a guy who represented freedom in America and, you know, all these things that they aspired to. And so when that, so then, you know, Czechoslovakia becomes liberated from the Soviet Union, and Václav Havel, who became the premier president of Czechoslovakia, and he was a fan of Frank Zappa. He was also a poet and an artist in his own right. So, you know, they're kind of tied together, and he somehow became their like trade representative. Yeah. Like, he actually got a job as the official representative from Czechoslovakia to the United States to develop trade. And they were talking about like shipping and logistics, and like it had nothing to do with music. Like he was on some talk show where they're like, well, is this about promoting rock and roll in Czechoslovakia? He's like, no, this has nothing to do with rock and roll.
It's about soybeans.
Yeah, we're trying to sell products to them and get them involved in like the international
we're trying to bring
trade.
Their products to market.
Yeah.
And it's very it comes across very earnestly. Also, the Reagan administration apparently like tells Havel like that knock it off. Like, if you want good relations with the United States, you need to shit can Frank Zappa.
Right. Because he'd pissed them off because he pissed off James Baker's wife.
Who was
the Secretary of State then.
Administration official at the time. Yeah. So it's I mean, it's like it's an amazing capstone on his life.
Right.
I mean, it's a surreal thing to actually, it's kind of what a lot of the people in the counterculture of the 60s ended up doing. You know, a lot of people became straight in the Reagan era. Now, he didn't. He did it in a very Zappa-ish way.
Right.
He became an official on the Prague side, on the Czech side of the ledger.
Right. He wasn't
he wasn't the U.S. envoy.
He didn't sell his songs for like a BMW commercial.
No, he wasn't a presidential appointee.
Right.
To a position that just meant you get to throw cocktail parties in Prague now.
Right. He wasn't some cheesy rock star who's sucking up to the president or some politician.
Who's doing that right now on the very medium that we are a part of. The Springsteen Obama show.
Oh, yeah. No, this is not the Springsteen Obama show. Like, look, I'm hanging out with the president, but I'm not going to do any actual work.
Yeah.
This is a guy who like took a job representing a foreign country to try to bring them to market.
Yeah, and so I didn't know any of that stuff, and it is interesting. But
they just don't. I guess at the end, it doesn't really pay off in the sense that like then they talk about how he got sick and eventually died.
Yeah, and
they never say like he did this, or if not for him, this factory wouldn't have opened in Czechoslovakia.
Right.
It doesn't. It kind of like is like, well, then he got sick, so he couldn't really follow through.
Yeah.
And it's kind of a bummer, I guess.
Yeah. So maybe you know this. There's a clip of Moon and Dweezil sort of reading a press statement, and they chastise the press that their father had been diagnosed as having cancer by the media.
Right.
Was that just was there a feud between the family and the media about privacy at that time?
I think there was probably always feuds. I mean, I was probably 13 or 14 at the time, so I wasn't really hip to what was going on at the time. I don't really know where that came from, but I guess the press diagnosed him as having cancer, and then they went out and said, the press diagnosed him as having cancer. We're here to say he actually does have cancer.
He does have cancer, yeah. He does.
Well, you know.
He's not feeling good. That's why he's not here right now.
Media got it right this time.
Yeah. That was interesting. The thing you mentioned that he seems to be a libertarian.
Yeah.
You know what I would be willing to bet that Frank Zappa would be really into? Crypto.
Oh, yeah. No doubt.
No question, right?
Yeah. He would be a crypto guy.
Probably pretty obnoxious about it, too.
Probably dropping an NFT.
I'm sure he would be releasing NFTs.
Yes.
In fact, Zappa State, for the spirit of the man, you got to start putting some NFTs out there.
I know some people.
Yeah.
I can get you in touch with the NFT people if you really need to be.
Yeah. I also, what do you think his thoughts would be on a vaccine mandate?
This is a very 2021 conversation right now. I don't
want to date this episode.
He was opposed to school. I can tell you that.
Yeah.
He writes in his book about how like he could not wait to get his kids out of school. Yeah. And as soon as they could not be in school anymore, he took them out. Like, I don't know that they really homeschooled them because I don't know that was so much of a thing like in the 70s or 80s when they were kids, but he definitely would have been into homeschooling. Right. So he was very against traditional education and more into like learn it yourself, dummy.
Yeah.
I don't really know. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure I don't know how much he was an early internet guy.
Yeah.
Because again, he died in '93, so like kind of before like the World Wide Web really became a thing.
Right.
But
like during a period where like John Perry Barlow,
sure,
is like very much into what's going on with the internet.
But the last few years of his life, he's pretty sick. He's trying to complete like certain artistic projects he's working on. So I don't know that he really like caught on to that. I don't know, man. Vaccine. I don't know if he would have been a vaccine mandate guy.
I don't know.
He could have gone either way. He could have been like Howard Stern, like I want to live, and everybody should get vaccinated because of that.
Yeah.
Or he could have been like the government's trying to impress us, and these vaccines haven't been tested. He could have gone either way. You could like the music and like the guy.
No, it's fine. It wouldn't change.
I'm not going to speculate. Why are you putting me in this position?
I'm not on trial here. Frank Zappa's on trial here. No, I mean, it's just like there's a lot of boomer musicians right now that are making things tough on their fans. Clapton, Van Morrison, and
that's literally the list.
And well, but it's partially because like the John Lennons and Jerry Garcias that would be making other people making things up. They died.
They had the decency to die.
Before we had to rethink about their lives.
Right. I don't know, man. He had weird ideas, and he probably would have got weirder and ornerier. Good Lord.
Yeah. Yeah.
So at the end, Gale says, "You make decisions about what's important to finish," which is another kind of composition.
Yeah, I love that line.
I really like that line.
Really love that line.
Like towards the end of his life, like Frank kept revisiting.
It's like his life was a composition.
Yes, he was an artist.
Yeah.
Everything he was doing was part of the art.
Yeah.
And even the decisions he made, okay, I'm going to work on this project and not that one because I only got, whatever, so much time.
It's just like the dot goes here and not there.
Yeah. And I that was really, that really showed that, like, she absolutely got what this guy was about.
Yes. Yeah.
Like, she just seems like a beautiful person.
She does.
And it's a shame she's not here anymore because that, I'm glad that there's this tribute to her as well.
Right.
And that she gets to speak so much.
She does. She's probably the star of the movie besides Frank.
Yeah. There's very little about the kids.
Very little.
Not a lot of talking or whatever, for whatever reason. The kids...
Some cute home footage of their home life.
As adults. You don't see, 50-year-old Dweezil.
No.
And that's probably because they famously have not gotten along a lot and have a lot of fights and lawsuits over the Zappa name and using the, can this person call themselves Zappa in terms of, recordings and other things. It's a lot of drama. It's a bummer.
Which is interesting because, and this is something that I think is hard not to think about when you're watching it. It's like, he's not that famous.
Right.
Yeah.
It's
It's not John Lennon.
Right.
It's Zappa. You know, he's I think everybody has a friend who's like, you gotta get into Zappa, man.
Right.
But like, you don't have 10 friends who are just like always listening to Zappa when you get in their car.
But it is valuable intellectual property.
Yeah.
If you will.
Yeah.
And, that's, it's hard to make it as a musician. So if your last name is Zappa and you can play that music and you're into it, that's probably the way to do it, man. Because otherwise, that'll at least fund you doing your own stuff.
It worked for a half dozen Marleys. That's
the Marley people keep coming out.
Yeah.
So anyway, what? I think the only thing that we're underselling, which we kind of talked a little bit, was just the emotional nature of this movie. Like, I really did have feelings during this movie,
definitely,
about a guy who operated in the world as though he was a robot who never had a feeling.
Yeah, right to the end.
Right to the end. Straight up.
Ruth writes him this heartfelt note when he's dying.
Right.
And she says,
she goes back into his life.
She goes back into his life. She says, don't read this now, please. And he just rips it open and reads it in front of her.
Uh-huh.
And then just says, that was very nice. And it's just like, he's right at the end. He can't.
Right.
He is like an emotionless robot.
Yeah.
But somehow not a jerk.
Yeah.
It's like no one seems to have regarded him as a jerk.
Yeah. He was just himself.
Yeah.
I'm going to say one more thing, which goes all the way back to the beginning.
Yeah.
So I'm taking this out of sequence.
Okay.
But in the very beginning of the movie, they talk about how when he was a little kid, his dad was like a chemist or something.
Yeah.
And he would play with chemistry sets. He didn't care about music. He was into chemistry.
Yeah.
And he tried to blow up his junior high.
Yes. They breeze right past it.
And it's just an amusing story about this adorable scamp.
Oh, yeah. Real esoteric guy right from the beginning.
Tried to blow... I feel like if in 2021 a kid tried to blow up a school, that would be all anybody would talk about for a month.
Yeah.
Like blowing, Afghanistan and everything off the front pages. Kid tries to blow up school, trending topic forever.
Yes.
And in those days, it was just like a thing you did, I guess. I don't know.
Well, it's like, it's just like, well, what are we going to do? Put him in jail?
Kid tried to blow up a school,
Yeah, he just...
What do you do, give him detention?
Yeah, exactly. So, and he didn't seem to matter. Did he finish school? Did he finish high school?
I think he did.
Okay.
But I'm not 100% sure he did.
By the skin of his teeth type deal.
I cannot imagine by like age 18, he was like Tell me more about, AP bio, whatever.
What was his feud with Captain Beefheart?
Oh man, Captain Beefheart was a cranky dude, man. Okay. Captain Beefheart had his own way of doing things. I mean, I don't think there's like really a Captain Beefheart rock doc, but Lord knows there should be.
There definitely.
Alex Winter.
Yeah.
If you're looking for another gig, talk to the Beefheart people because he's right in there.
So I do want to take it back real quick because of I believe that Frank would be such a crypto guy.
Yeah.
I think that there's almost a way to view this as a sequel to the Silk Road documentary that Alex Winter did right before this.
Interesting. Okay. Yes.
Like that there's like an intellectual thread. Yeah.
Yeah. So he and Beef, I mean, they were just like high school buddies who both became successful in a weird way, I guess, quote unquote successul.
They're both very successful. Right?
I mean, I don't know that Beefheart really ever sold any albums.
Yeah.
He became more successful as a painter later. But it's not like the kids these days can name all the Beefheart songs.
No, but like you can't go into a...
The dust blows forward and the dust blows back. One of the great songs off Trout Mask Replica. The kids love that.
But you can't go into a vinyl store right now without like whoever works there being like into Beefheart.
Yeah. If you go to a record store and there's not a, Captain Beefheart album on the wall...
Yeah,
and they're charging $65 for it, but nobody's going to buy it.
Right.
You're
in the wrong. You're in a bad record.
Why are you in that record store? Yeah. No, he represents something because he's almost a purer example of like Frank was involved in the world. He was engaged. He was mixing it up. He was telling you his opinions, and a lot of times it would piss people off. Beefheart is like seen as this like weird outsider artist genius who made this crazy, wacky, goofy art, but like nobody understands, but it must be great. And, but he was just kind of a quiet guy on his own. So like he didn't piss people off in the same way.
Yeah.
I love his record. So I love his music. So I'm not dissing. I'm just saying like he kind of represents something. And it is kind of that thing where it's like, if you're into weird music, you're supposed to be into Captain Beefheart. And maybe some people just kind of like put that on the list of things that is cool or whatever. But yeah, I think they just were very prickly, weird characters who just were not bound and determined to get along. But like they did that Bongo Fury album together, very good. Frank produced Trout Mask Replica, one of the great albums. I learned about that by reading Kurt Loder's book, Bat Chain Puller. Once again, Kurt Loder shows up, a beloved recurring character in the Rock Docs universe,
like the antithesis of John Scher.
He's one of the heroes.
He's one of the heroes of the Rock Docs cinematic universe.
And anyway, so. In summary, if somebody's not really ever been hip to Frank Zappa, do you recommend this rock doc?
Yes, definitely. I think you will, especially if you know very little, you'd be like, how did I not have I know almost nothing about this guy. I think I've heard his name. There's a statue in Baltimore, but what is, like I think you'd almost be rewarded the less you know.
There you go.
Yeah.
You'll be rewarded the less you know.
But that's also, this is my...
Knowing stuff's overrated.
But this is my whole Zappa take. It's like, people need to just demystify this stuff. Just throw it on.
Just throw it on.
Just throw it on. It's Zappa. It's fine.
Check out our Spotify playlist.
Yeah.
About this.
Also Beefheart. Like...
Oh, yeah, Beefheart.
Just, like, people... All these...
Just relax and throw it on.
All these gatekeepers... and like that are like tastemakers and gatekeepers at the same time that want to tell people that everything's so challenging. It's fucking music. It's not that challenging. Put it on. You'll like it most of the time. And if you don't, that's also fine. There's a lot of stuff out there.
This has been Rock Docs. Thank you.